Hello and welcome to North 100, a Canadian Highlander podcast, brought to you by you with your support at the Patreon over at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. I'm Serge. Joining me today, there's a Wheeler.
Ahoy.
And that's it, which is maybe a little scary and maybe a little different because this is our first time recording after the wonderful Jeremy White has stepped down. If you didn't see it already, there's a previous episode, just a big thank you post and some of his thoughts on life changes on why he stepped away. But talking to Wheeler, we realized that we're not really too worried about being able to fill the air.
Yeah, I have this great ability of being able to not shut up, keep talking, and especially in regards to magic, I could just go on and continue forth
Fantastic. Thank you.
no matter the subject.
Good. So we're gonna try just the two of us, and we'd love to hear your thoughts after on what your feel on the vibe and all that stuff is, and of course on the quality. You know, am I able to fill into the very big shoes that Jer left when it came to critically analyzing these cards? So welcome to part one of our Crimson Vow set release with any of our North 100 set releases. A reminder that this is not exhaustive. Our goal here is not to cover every single card in the set, only the ones that we think are relevant to the format or that we think are going to be fun to talk about, even if we don't think they're relevant to the format. Today, we are going to be covering white and blue cards, and we do have one commander card because for the most part, they weren't all that exciting, but more on that when we get to the one card. So let's jump into it. And the first card today, Cemetery Protector. This is a 4-mana 3/4 human soldier for 2 white. It has flash, and when it enters the battlefield, exile a card from a graveyard. Whenever you play a land or cast a spell, if it shares a card type with the exiled card, create a 1/1 white human creature token. And I like this card a lot. And I think Wheeler's going to be on the same page for this because 4 is typically a scary number as a threat and represents the top end of your curve. But Flash changes a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I'll literally die for a 3/4 body with flash. Like I will valiantly jump in front of like a runaway spaceship.
Well, the good news is your opponent's going to die too, right? Like 3/4
yeah.
ends games.
Exactly. Mutually shared destruction, except it doesn't end up, you don't have to do that. You just have to have, 4 mana. Yeah, this body is pretty large. It doesn't have flying, so it's not in that kind of case of Resto Angel or
Yeah.
Glorious Protector from Kaldheim. But this just does so much. I think that's
Yeah.
a big thing with like this card in particular, but also just so much in this set is that it kind of looks very straightforward on first glance, but the implications of what all these different abilities mean in regards to, what happens during the course of a match of Magic means that in this case, Cemetery Protector is going to be pooping out more tokens than you thought it would, or being a lot more annoying at disrupting your opponent's game plans on the board or in the graveyard.
I like it for that. And I like to give this almost as a modal card, right? It's a proactive threat. It's super great. Or rather, if you play it early, I don't mind ramping this out with acceleration and hitting a fetch land in a graveyard and then having it go wide and put a clock on an opponent. And I also like it as a reactive threat, hitting a reanimator target or a flashback spell and just getting more value out of it. And that flexibility makes me evaluate this card even higher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does a lot, and does a lot in a color where like white or even white X's, they're not a stranger to tapping Ancient Tomb.
All right, real quick, what decks are you going to put this in? I like it in blue-white tempo.
I've been looking at kind of like a blue-white Soul Ring control sort of thing. Like, I don't want to call it tap out because so many of the threats now have flash, but
Right.
it's effectively just like blue white. My 4 drops have 4 toughness, where a bunch of them do have flash, and you're playing a bunch of like stereotypical control cards as well, but you can kind of just hunker down with this and have it carry the game.
I mean, in a flash deck, I also kind of love the line of Ephemerate or Resto Angel, even resetting what you exiled with it, so you can be more proactive with ending the game with those 1/1s too, which is kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, as part of the new format, Wheeler, why don't you take us on to the next card?
Okay, here we go. Last time I did this, and it's the perfect card. Next up, we have Dawnheart Geist. It's 1 and a white for a 1/3 Spirit Warlock. It's a creature. And it says whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you gain 2 life. Well, enchantment based decks tend to like effects that benefit you when you cast enchantments, but I don't know if 2 life is enough for me unless I'm doing something degenerate. What about you, Serge?
I'm on the same page. So one of the scariest things in Enchantress is dying. Uh, great insight, Jaeger.
I mean, no, you're not wrong.
Yeah, it's a deck where you don't do much of anything. You're not really interacting with the board in terms of like putting creatures to block their creatures. You never want to chump with an enchantress, for example. And until your deck hits a certain density, you're basically goldfishing and hoping you don't die before you get to do anything cool. And I have experimented in the past with cards like Wall of Omens and what's the green one?
Wall of Blossoms.
Wall of Blossoms, just as like, please get in front of anything so I don't die. And if you're worried about getting run over, maybe
There's a green version of this card called Herald of the Pantheon.
it's a 2/2, right?
Yeah, it's a 2/2,
Yeah.
but it also reduces the cost of enchantments
Yeah,
and can be
yeah.
found off Green Sun Zenith.
Yeah, I like this a little bit better than the Herald of the Pantheon because this blocks your Ragavans, this blocks your Goblin Guides and stuff like this. Where again, the problem with that 2/2 body is it's a synergy card, but its stat line doesn't really seem to know what it's doing to help out because it's not really defensive. It's an acceleration card, but it's a 2/2. Like if
Hmm.
that was a 1/3 or an 0/4, I would slam dunk it in every Enchantress deck. As a 2/2, its stats make it very squishy.
Yeah.
I'm medium on this. I
Yeah.
would try it, and I wouldn't be surprised if it got cut for something a little bit more engine focused.
Yeah, if I think if you find yourself really caring about the life gain, or you're doing something with like Lich's Mastery, just being a complete sicko. But other than that, yeah,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
just got better options.
yep. All right, next up we have the Faith-Bound Judge. This is a 3-mana 4/4. Pardon? 3-mana 4/4 Spirit Soldier, 1 white white. It's got to have a downside. Oh, there we go. Defender. It has Defender, Flying, and Vigilance. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if Faithbound Judge has 2 or fewer judgment counters on it, put a judgment counter on it. As long as Faithbound Judge has 3 or more judgment counters on it, it can attack as though it didn't have Defender. And then it also has Disturb for 7 for 5 white white. And on the backside, we have Sinner's Judgment, Enchant Player. At the beginning of your upkeep, pardon me, put a judgment counter on Sinner's Judgment. If there are 3 or more judgment counters, Enchanted Player loses the game. If it Sinner's Judgment we put into the graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. I This is very flavorful. This doesn't feel like a magic card, Wheeler.
It feels like a custom card.
Yeah, like this doesn't feel like a something you would play in Magic the Gathering.
Yeah, I don't hate it though. I mean,
No, I don't either.
it's like I want every single impulse I have that is just screaming at me saying you should not play this or you'll never play this is currently being barricaded by just one brain cell that's like, now hold on, Ben. What if we won the game with this card?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Currently, I'm thinking of self-mill and replenish. Like, ignore the front half, only play the back half, right? The disturb half.
Yeah, like I'm thinking there was a while, I haven't actually, checked up on the archetype itself, but there was a while where there was like a blue white enchantment based deck that used replenish kind of, within intuition, gifts ungiven, decree of silence. So the blue decree and solemnity. So those kind of cards that basically solemnity saying, hey, nothing can get counters, and then all these old enchantments having weirdo counter effects on them, saying like, okay, fair enough, I guess I'll counter literally every spell opponents play.
Sure, just like this sort of stasis lockout enchantment deck.
Yeah, and they're slightly, they're a gifts ungiven combo deck, and they're not,
Sure, yeah.
all in on playing enchantresses or whatnot, but I could see them playing something like this where, you get it out early enough, it's going to at least threaten to do something very shortly, I guess, with the judgment counters. And then it could just trade with a big idiot. Like it blocks and trades with questing beast. That's usually
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
enough for
Wow.
me. The flying is pretty big. This just
Yeah.
eats all the X1 flyers.
Yeah.
It has real weaknesses, but it does enough, I think.
Yeah. Its real weakness is it's a 3 mana 4/4 that does nothing. Or
Yeah.
nothing proactive, rather. This is almost kind of fun in stacks as well, like
Hmm.
Mardu sort of style. If you're behind
Yeah.
early, it clogs up the board really well, and it's a fantastic win con when nothing is happening.
Exactly. They,
Right?
they are going to want to get through it eventually. And if they get through it, they're using cards or attacking into it or whatever. And then you can just play it back later. Or you could also just sacrifice it to your own smokestack.
I like in that deck actually playing this out and forcing your opponent to have to overextend to punch through it, and then just wrathing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like this does a great job of making your opponent be like, okay, well, normally I wouldn't play these 2 extra creatures in my hand, but they have this 4/4. I can't believe how much we talked about this judge.
I don't know how much this statement's going to track, but it to me, this card is mostly summed up with if they printed this card like 4 years ago, it would have been bad. We may have still had this amount of conversation surrounding it, but it would have been incorrect.
Yeah.
But like the numbers have been tweaked and the format has changed and whatnot so much to the point where we're having this conversation, but I don't think that's wrong. Like I think it's just things are juiced up enough that I'm okay with this dude.
Oh yeah. All right, let's move on. What's next, Wheeler?
Up next, we have Fleeting Spirit. Fleeting Spirit is 1 and a white for a 3/1 spirit. You pay a white and exile 3 cards from your graveyard. It gains first strike until end of turn. But you can also discard a card and exile Fleeting Spirit. And then you return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So it's kind of another card in that line of 3/1 white creatures at 2 that can protect themselves in
Right,
a
right, right.
couple of different ways. How do you feel? This feels like it's is this a Adonto Vanguard number 3 for you?
Not quite. I mean, the fact that you can do it at instant speed, right? The ability to bring it
Mhm.
back from the battlefield is quite strong. You can't do it as an onboard shenanigan to get a block or anything like that. But then again, discarding a card is a very real cost. I like Adonto Vanguard because as the aggressive deck, your life is a resource that you're very happy to spend. But a card is much more expensive, in particular, because you have to apply a certain amount of pressure before your control opponent, your mid range component, can stabilize and kill you. And
Mhm.
bringing this back is much more expensive than the 4 life. It's good though. I like it.
Yeah. This is 3 cards is a lot. Like we'll get to this later in the set review because there are more cards that exile 3 from the graveyard as part of a cost, but that is a large amount of cards.
Yep.
And yeah, that sounds like a solid take if you ask me.
Well, let's move on to Hallowed Haunting. This is a 4 mana mythic enchantment for 2 white and reads, as long as you control 7 or more enchantments, creatures you control have flying and vigilance. And then whenever you cast an enchantment spell, create a white spirit cleric creature token with this creature's power and toughness are equal to the number of spirits that you control. Oh, neat. They printed another one of these kind of like Dirtle Enchantress finishers.
Mhm. Which is exactly why I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this because I want to pass it over to hear your thoughts. But
Yeah.
I do admittedly like this better than the previous ones we have received. I think it just does a bit more by itself and without additional resources. Like Sigil of the Empty Throne is the 5 mana one.
Yeah, it gives you 4/4 angels.
It's making 4/4s. But
Yeah.
like this just also it sounds really silly to say, but this also just lets your eternal witness have flying and vigilance, which is kind of nice.
It comes down earlier, which is important too. As we were mentioning before, when we were talking about what was it, the Dawnheart Geist, the biggest problem with Enchantress is getting your engine online before you just die. And you never want to play, what was the Sanctum called again? You just said it.
A Sigil of the Empty Throne.
Sigil of the Empty Throne. Thank you. You never want to play that and then pass, right? Like that feels bad because you're throwing a turn away, likely on a turn where you probably need to wrath or you're facing lethal. And Hallowed Haunting on turn 3 because you're almost certainly, you got some acceleration in your deck, or you probably should have mulliganed your hand. Like you're
Hmm.
fine to do this on turn 3. The amount of pressure that you're going to be facing from your opponent at this point compared to the turn after, shocking how different it is. You could possibly even turn 2 this.
Yeah. Yeah. This has turn two with a Sarah Sanctum written all over it.
Yeah. And that being the case, I mean, the threat it plays isn't as spicy, but I think they could get pretty spicy pretty quickly here.
Yeah. This is it feels weird for me to like this card as much as possible. Or sorry, let me take that again. It feels weird for me to like this card as much as I do for an Enchantress deck, especially after I feel like I've spent, the last year saying like, no, you can't dirtle with Enchantress. You got to do lands package. You got to A+B combo kill. What with all the new Enchantresses out of Modern Horizons too. But now this card shows up and it's like, all right, yeah, you got your stuff. You got your act together. You got your
Yeah.
act together. Okay, you can hang with the crew.
Yeah, go for it. One last thought on this card, because I don't want to spend too long on it, is despite the fact that you're making potentially smaller creatures 1/1s instead of 4/4s, it is important to remember that that style of Enchantress deck is a density deck. And
Hmm.
so long as you're making creatures that keep you from dying, it doesn't even matter if you're trading or even trading favorably. As soon as you get that engine going, you'll eventually be able to outscale and outpace what your opponent does, and then your creatures will just get ridiculous at that point.
Yeah, I guess that's worth just briefly describing too, is that this also just plays a very defensive role. Like
Yep. Yep.
it pivots, whereas Sigil of the Empty Throne is so expensive that it kind of defaults to I'm doing this to kill you, or I'm doing this because I have to survive, but I'm probably dying anyways.
Yeah. Get out of my head, Wheeler.
Yeah, but just making a whole bunch of smaller bodies to soak up big hits is pretty enticing. And then these do get bigger, right? You get a 1/1, and then if you make another, you get 2/2/2s, et cetera,
Yeah.
et
The
cetera.
pack rat, right?
Yeah, exactly. It poops out pack rats. That's with vigilance and flying. It's hard to say no to that.
All right. Next up. Oh, next up is you. Take it away.
It's me. And boy oh boy, is this a good one. Hopeful Initiate. It's 1 white for a 1/2 human warlock. It has an ability called Training. This is the first card that we've seen with Training. And what Training says is whenever this creature attacks with another creature that has greater power, put a 1/1 counter on this creature. So if Hopeful Initiate attacks with another creature that has greater power, put a 1/1 counter on Hopeful Initiate. It's like reverse mentor, basically. And then it has an activated ability of pay 2 and a white, remove 2 1/1 counters from among creatures you control, destroy target artifact or enchantment. Well, that seems relatively free.
That's so good.
Hmm.
What an incredible one drop. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, I'm definitely a little worried. Well, I'm not that worried. We're eggs is resilient. Artifacts are resilient.
I would have been happy even if this is a 1 mana 1/2 just with training. What is that second ability?
Yeah, and it's so flexible. Doesn't even
Yeah.
have to be from the initiate. You
Yeah.
can pull them off other stuff. I mean, pulling it off the initiate's nice because then you just have other bigger creatures, which means you get to put more counters on it. This sure is a magic card.
Yeah, help me out really quickly. What was the name of that green? It's a 1 drop with Evolve, I think.
Experiment 1.
Experiment one, right? Like
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
people know how good that card is, right?
Yeah, not to say that I can see the future, but a couple of years ago, actually on this very podcast, Serge, I may have said that I think they're planning on using 1/1 counters more often, just generally on
Hmm,
creatures, especially in white, as a neat way of helping moderate power levels and as well, providing this just synergy that is always kind of there, but you don't have to be a counters deck to do counters things.
agreed.
And so, yeah, there are just so many cards that have counters on them that you might not even notice that can get them over and over and over again, which makes it real scary. Real scary. Well, that's enough terrifying 1 drops. How about a spicy 3 for me?
All right, we got Catilda, Dawnheart Martyr. This is a 3-mana XX legendary spirit warlock for 1 white white. Has flying, lifelink, and protection from vampires, and the power and toughness are equal to the number of permanents you controls that are spirits and or enchantments. And then it also disturbs for 5 for 3 white white, and the backside is Catilda's Rising Dawn. It's an enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets flying, lifelink, and protection from vampires, and it gets plus X, where X is the number of permanents you control that are spirits and or enchantments. And then it has the usual disturbed text. If it would go into your graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. I'm kind of medium on this. How about you?
I mean, my juices are flowing, and I want to cast this, and I want to scream at the top of my lungs about
Do you?
how much I let me finish about how much I love this kind of card, but for the sake of my credit file, I am unlikely to sleeve this up that
Yeah.
often. I think it needs dedicated support, and I don't know. I mean, spirits might end up becoming that thing. I do think that there are enough spirits across blue and white, that's the highest density, where their role could really just become kind of like battle cruiser almost.
I guess, but like when I look at a card like this, I don't want a battle cruiser. I want a lord. Right,
Yeah.
right? Like that's what I want the punch from.
Right. But I think that this, because of the disturb ability as well,
Hmm,
and because if you're in a blue white deck that wants cheap spells and wants to root around, you might have yourself a faithful mending or a careful study, a thought scour, maybe anything like that.
sure, okay.
You can, the disturb being just disgusting late game on a Geista Saint Traft,
Okay, all right, fair enough.
anything like that.
Yeah, it does give the creature flying, lifelink, and pro vampires, and plus two rather. Like that's not nothing.
I think you need to play this in like the Sanctum Stompy list. So like the enchantment aggression.
So you're thinking of this as bestow less so than disturb. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would play it in a deck like that where it's going to do double duty, where it
Sure.
provides some amount of value. It's not the perfect threat up front, it's not the perfect aura on the back, but it just so happens to be 2 cards in one that also synergizes with the rest of your deck.
All right.
And while that's niche, I think it's enough to at least give it a home, you know?
All right.
Speaking of home,
Go on.
I'm pretty ready to give this one. It's called Lantern Flare Surge. It's an instant for 1 and a white, and it has cleave.
Our first cleave card.
This is our first cleave card, which might be a little interesting to read out loud.
Yeah, thinking about that.
So, cleave is an alternate cost. And in the case of Lantern Flare, its cleave cost is X red and a white. So you may cast this spell for its cleave cost. And if you do, you remove the words in square brackets, meaning that, as I'm about to read the text, there are some words in square brackets. If you pay the cleave cost, ignore me saying those words. Otherwise, please pay attention to those words. So, those words are Lantern Flare deals X damage to target creature or planeswalker, and you gain X life. Square brackets mode. X is the number of creatures you control. End square brackets. So, I'm going to use my little bit on this as you got to think of Cleave as 2 separate cards, really. It's like a double-sided card, like a fire ice sort of card, except both effects are going to be pretty close to each other, and you're not going to get screwed over by Spellseeker. So it's either 1 and a white, it's an instant, deals X damage to a creature or planeswalker, and you gain X life, where X is the number of creatures you control, or it's X red white, deals X damage to a creature or planeswalker, and you gain X life. I think I like that. The end. Serge, how do you feel about Cleave and or Lantern Flare?
For the most part, I'm okay with Cleave. I'm not in the
Mm-hmm.
group of internet people who's been saying that it's not intuitive. I mean, it's funny to see us stumbling over it right now because trying to describe it to an audio only audience obviously makes it like really dumb. but I
Mhm.
do think it's pretty straightforward and pretty intuitive. And maybe if
Mhm.
you haven't played with a card before, trying to wrap around your head is dumb. But like once you do it a couple of times, you'll probably be like, "Oh, I get it."
It's like mutate,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. How do I feel about this one? I mean, I feel about it similar to Catilda in the previous one, where I like my cards to be able to do something pretty reliable each time.
Mhm.
Which is why, like, I worry about Catilda just on an empty board. It's just a 1/1 for 3, which doesn't feel great. But again, you've made some good points about that card, which is fine. So the Lantern Flare non-cleave mode is a little clunky because sometimes if you just got Wrathed and you need to clear something, it's not going to do anything. But its cleave cost is okay. I like killing creatures. I like gaining life. I'm always pretty happy to lightning helix things. This would be a pretty expensive lightning helix,
Mhm.
but the flexibility isn't bad.
Yeah, I think it's fighting real estate with the double face modal card Kabira Takedown,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is just much like Lantern Flare has two different sides. However, one of them is land, and
Yeah.
you don't gain the life. But
And the other side to this is like, God, this is expensive. I don't have like 30 mana right now.
yeah, yeah, I'm more willing to defend Catilda than this card. But
Yeah.
yeah, I will absolutely get blown out by this card. That's where I'm personally putting it.
Yeah. This is the type of card that I won't play and I won't be sad when I lose to it.
Hmm. Hmm.
All right. Next up, we have the Allenbach Escort. This is another 1 mana 1/1 human cleric for a single white, has vigilance, and sacrifice it. Target creature you control that has a +1/+1 counter on it gains lifelink and indestructible until end of turn. Cool. This is great.
We've come so far
Yeah.
from. I just think about the days of Canlander and White Weenie, where I would play 1 mana 1/1 flyers, Suntail Hawks, Lantern Commies, and I would be happy about it. The days of celebrating a new Savannah Lions.
Yeah.
Like, oh my god, Elite Vanguard? Wow. I think this card's pretty good.
I do, dude. Yeah.
Yeah, again, putting counters, this is going to be at its best in a deck where you could reliably put counters, but also so many decks have counters on things. Green, white, or mono white, especially, is where I'm looking at this. The fact that it is a human, a lot of humans
Yeah. Yeah.
do stuff with 1/1 counters, indestructible and lifelink.
Yeah. This is absurd. So
Yeah.
what I'm thinking about as a parallel here is Dauntless Bodyguard, which is a
Hmm.
1 mana 2/1 human knight. And as it enters the battlefield, you have to choose another creature you control. So it's great as a way to protect the president or whatever sort of way you want to do it. And you see it in
Yeah.
combo decks and stuff like that. But while still being played in aggressive decks isn't as good because you don't have that flexibility, I think the escort is going to have a similar role. It won't be able to protect the same range of creatures that Dauntless Bodyguard can based on sequencing, but it's going to offer way more flexible lines in the right deck.
Yeah, more long-term effect as well. Like you're still, if you can remove the oopsie doopsie, I don't have anything with counters, which can be pretty easily done across the decks where you're mostly going to want to play this, then this is just going to provide you with protection as well as just a more powerful in the moment ability. A larger swing.
God, the lifelink swing is going to be absurd.
Not to mention itself, if it does get bigger, because typically decks that have counters can also make things without counters bigger. Just having a thing with vigilance, like this thing holding a GT is scary. This
Yeah.
this thing holding any kind of equipment is scary. So it fits well into that. And if I were facing this, I might be something of a well, I wouldn't be a bystander, so this segue is terrible, but here's a magic card. It's called Panicked Bystander.
Nice try. Nice try.
Hey, you know what? They're not always good, much like white 2-drops, but let's see about this one. So, Panic Bystander is 1 and a white for a 2/2. It's a human peasant. Whenever it or another creature you control dies, you gain 1 life. And at the beginning of your end step, if you gain 3 or more life this turn, transform Panic Bystander, which turns into Cackling Culprit, aka the Dude. It's a human
Wait,
rogue.
what?
Oh, it just looks like Jeff Bridges.
It kind of does. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Instead of a hand, if it was just a glass of whiskey or whatever?
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah, even the flavor text says, "I'm bad. That's like your opinion, man." Um, So it turns into Cackling Culprit, which is a 3/5, and now it's a black creature. It's a human rogue. Whenever it or another creature you control dies, you gain 1 life. That's the same. But then it also has pay 1 and a black. It gains Death Touch until end of turn. I kind of like seeing this card as just the backside. Like in the decks where I want to play this,
Just a 2 mana 3/5.
yeah, like I'm going to play this. I mean, it's Soul Wardens all the way down, baby.
Yeah.
It just transformed this immediately.
Right. It's super easy for that deck to gain 3 life. But what are you doing with a 2 mana 3/5? Like, this isn't Goyf.
No, but it's a 2 mana 3/5 that, well, I mean, Serge, maybe you can recount the somewhat recent match that we had where you played against the white black or the mono white, but with a light black splash.
It sucked. It was miserable. It was, I mean, I had a smile on my face the whole time because it's great to be playing Magic card in person, but you made me not really enjoy playing Magic cards in person.
You had to smile because you were on camera.
Yeah. I was dying inside. No.
Yeah, and that's what that deck does.
I don't think this card makes that deck better or makes this win any faster.
So why I like that is because you're a deck that has things die, right? You have creatures die, utility creatures that you then bring back to play with relative ease. And so you will get some life gain off of this. But then it's also just a creature that itself is very difficult to kill with the huge toughness.
It does have a very thick booty, yes.
It will gain you some life by itself as well, so it's kind of tying into the theme of the deck, but also you're a deck that plays Walking Ballista, and you're a deck that plays... Oh, it can only give itself
death only touch. Gives itself Death Touch. It doesn't give target creature Death Touch.
Well, I mean, at least it gives it... I guess that also just disincentivizes people from attacking you, which is kind of nice, and it also makes it so this can attack. I'll give it a shot. It's entered my I'll give it a shot territory.
Sure, and that's fair. That's totally fair. All right. I'll give you that Radiant Grace, Wheeler. Oh, the segue. Radiant Grace is a 1 mana aura for a single white pip. Enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and has vigilance. And when enchanted creature dies, return Radiant Grace to the battlefield transformed under your control. Under your control but attached to target opponent. Okay. Enchant player. Creature's enchanted player controls enters the battlefield tapped. Okay. So you play this, it makes your creature stronger and more aggressive, and then when it dies, you Thalia them.
Yeah. You hit them with that imposing sovereign.
Yeah.
That Kinjali Sunwing. That blind obedience.
So those effects are good and strong and powerful and are typically how you win with a Death and Taxes style deck. Is your opponent's cards, while they could be more powerful than your threats, they don't get to play them. They're often a turn behind because of those effects, or they can't block because of imposing sovereign. That being said, I don't know if I love this card. I think I would rather have another creature. I think there is enough density in threats currently that I don't know if I love this. Are you high on this card?
Not for Canlander, I don't think. Like, it's one of those cards where there's just so many cards to choose from.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is the flavor you've picked. Like, this is where you've landed. And I think the card's good. I think the effect on the back is one of the most difficult effects for most decks, control or aggro, to push through. It's amazing how much of the game is designed around permanents coming into play untapped.
Yeah, totally.
But where am I finding a slot for this? And is it better than any other option? And I think it just falls a little too short,
And what does it do to your opening curve? Like, where does this fit into your dream hand? Right?
Yeah. How excited am I to see this card?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on.
Well, here's a card I'm kind of excited to see, but the artwork shows a couple of people that are a bit more excited. It's the Resistance Squad.
Yeah, these people are here to party.
They are, I think they're quite literally crashing some sort of wedding, maybe, even though there is a card called Wedding Crashers in this set already. I digress. It's a 2 and a white for a 3/2 human soldier. And when Resistance Squad enters the battlefield, if you control another human, draw a card. I only want to play this with Alurin.
I was going to say, I didn't think this was a mid-range card. Yeah.
No. Yeah, I can't get Allurin off my mind. I think about it all day and all night. I just want to play Allurin, but also humans.
Hmm.
Humans Allurin. That's all I want to do. I can't stop thinking about the loops. What
Cool.
about you? Do you also think about the loops?
I don't think about looping quite as much, but I agree that this card is probably a little underwhelming to play in a fair manner.
Hmm.
It's just, it's cute, but it's slow.
Yeah, it's better off in a Voldaren manner.
All right. Next up, we have Savior of Allenbach. This is a 3 mana 1/2 human soldier for 1 a white and a second white. It has the training ability, so if it attacks a larger creature, it itself gets larger. And whenever Savior of Allenbach trains, exile up to one other target creature from the battlefield or creature card from a graveyard. And then when it leaves the battlefield, put the exiled cards onto the battlefield under their owner's control. Hold on. You can reanimate with this?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah.
What? So this either O-rings your opponent's creatures or you can reanimate your own creatures?
Yeah.
This is absurd.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because of course,
Yeah.
so the way the training trigger works is you can attack and then exile their blocker before they get to block.
Hmm.
What?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, this card is obviously busted, both in a way to like clear blockers and be the aggressive white deck that you want to play. Or, I mean, even if you're an aggressive white deck, you don't even necessarily need to think of this as like a reanimator card, but just a way to bring back your own threats if there's nothing you want to clear out of the way for your opponent. Wow, this is really great and really versatile and just really strong. It's a little rough as a 3 mana 1/2, but that upside though.
Yeah. It getting the training to trigger early is a bit of an issue, right? Like it only does this when it trains. And so it does offer a couple of different avenues that your opponent can, go down to prevent this card from ruining their whole career. That said, it's not that far fetched to describe a scenario where this card drops on turn 2 and it comes in on turn 2 by like a mana dork or off of a Moxen draw, which might mean that there's already a creature in play with more power than this.
Like a 1 mana 2/2, like Isamaru, for
You
example.
got an Isamaru, maybe you went Land Mox Thalia, or Imposing Sovereign, or anything really, Grizzly Bears. And if this card gets to attack, like, it's going to just get out of hand very quickly. And I don't think it's as bad late game as I had initially thought as well. Like, I saw this card, I'm like, well, if I draw this late, how am I feeling? And I'm like, well, Mistress Factory is a 2/2. Mutavolt's a 2/2. Treetop Village is a 3/3.
Like even the line late game, where if you attack with this and any creature for the training thing, you can just reanimate something in your graveyard and be like, "You gonna block my 2/3?"
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right?
I'm just meaning like the qualification to get training going is a lot easier later in the kind of decks that would even want to play
Yeah,
this. And then when
agreed.
that happens, it's all over. It's all over. Speaking of it's all over, um, my near decade long wait for this card is finally over, Serge. I'm talking about Voice of the Blessed. This is white for a 2/2 Spirit Cleric. Whenever you gain life, put a 1/1 counter on Voice of the Blessed. As long as Voice of the Blessed has 4 or more 1/1 counters on it, it has Flying and Vigilance. And as long as it has 10 or more 1/1 counters on it, it has Indestructible. They have been reprinting a Johnny's Pride Mate
Yeah.
over and over and over. And then we finally get another mono white Pride Mate variant in the form of Hallowed Priest. And Hallowed Priest is arena only, no other physical copy. We've received white black versions, a white green version, but not another mono white version. And finally, here it is. My body is ready.
Yeah, this card slaps.
How do you feel about this card in a deck that doesn't play Soul Warden?
As somebody who has played against an Ajani's Pride Mate, the only thing that keeps you in the game is the fact that you can chump block, and they have taken that away.
Yeah. Yep.
This thing can just fly now. When it gets out of hand, you no longer get to just like gum up the board with 1/1s. You just get to watch it kill you.
And anybody that has played an Ajani's Pride Mate in Canlander, or even in other formats, honestly,
right now, yeah.
Well, you'll know, like, people look at the last ability and be like, oh, you can't judge a planeswalker by its ultimate. But then it's like, okay, that's actually pretty handy, you know? We get to 10 counters a lot. It happens because you just keep getting jump blocked over and over again. But wow. Oh my God.
All right, let's move on to our last white card of the day, the Welcoming Vampire. Oh, a friend. They're a 3-mana 2/3 vampire for 2 and a white, has flying, and whenever one or more other creatures with power 2 or less enter the battlefield under your control, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. And you know what? That's fine.
Yeah.
Look, we've all wanted to play Mentor of the Meek, and we've all eventually taken it out of our deck because that one extra mana is really expensive. Like, really, really expensive. It adds up to the point that you really don't get that much value out of it. And while the hypothetical pop-off potential for Welcoming Vampire isn't as high as Mentor of the Meek, be real honest with yourself and ask yourself, how many cards have I ever actually drawn off of Mentor of the Meek? Especially the turn after I play it, or possibly the turn you play it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
This card is phenomenal. This card is so good. So good.
Yeah.
And that's very specific, like low to the ground, aggressive, probably mono white or white X.
White green. This could even go in like white black, like an aristocrat style deck wouldn't hate this.
Or D&T.
Yeah, as a coward, or sorry, rather, as someone that isn't a coward, who never cut mentor.
Go with the line as a coward, please.
Oh, as a coward, wait, I checked my calendar. Sorry, I thought it was opposite day, and it's not. And I will never lie on microphone. Mentor of the Meek, I've never cut it out of my Soul Sisters deck. Bygone Bishop, which is very similar to this as well. Again, near and dear to my heart. And now there's a third version, and it's the best of the bunch, and it has flying, and it has, oh my God.
It has 3
Oh
toughness
my
as
God.
well.
I am going to make, people are going to be, it's great. We get to play in paper again, slow and steady, these tournaments. I am going to destroy attendance at Yellow Jacket by playing this mono white list. Oh yeah. Oh, I'm so ready. I am.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And I hope you're ready because we're on to a different color, blue. First up, Cemetery Illuminator, 1 blue for a 2/3 spirit with flying. When it ETBs or attacks, exile a card from a graveyard. You can look at the top card of your library anytime. Once each turn, you can cast a spell from the top of your library if it shares a card type with the card exiled with Cemetery Illuminator. Well, I'm going to exile an instant and then have a lot of instants in my deck, usually blue instants, or just repeatedly eat my opponent's graveyard. How do you feel, Serge?
Yeah, I mean, it's got Courser of Crewfix mana in blue.
Yeah.
Blue finally has a way to cast. It's cast. Thank goodness. It doesn't let you play lands off the top of your deck. I just saw that very key difference between cast and play. No, this card's absurd.
Yeah, repeatable graveyard hate on a mono blue card. Not bad. Not bad. Yeah, wow.
And card advantage. I mean, look, one of my favorite blue cards is probably Future Sight. And what if Future Sight was a flying 2/3 that could kill you?
I know all this might sound like a bit hyperbole, but this can also just turn sideways.
Yeah. And the beautiful thing is, because you can look at the top of your library at any time, you can set up what you want to exile to make it work too. Right?
Yeah. Oof. On to something that's slightly more particular with exiling, though.
Yeah. We've got this Cobbled Lancer, which is a 1-mana 3/3 zombie horse for a single blue pip. I don't know about you, but does it look sad in the art?
I mean, I'd be sad too if I was a dead horse.
As an additional cast to cost this spell, exile a creature card from your graveyard, and then 3 in a blue, exile it from your graveyard to draw a card. I guess I
actually like this card.
Do you? All right, take it away. Take it away.
Okay, so again, we've seen cards like this before, and everybody hypes them up, and they think that the additional cost is easy peasy lemon squeezy, like Ska Bruinator.
Yeah, the whole previous Innistrad set had this mechanic, right? Yeah.
But there are now so many ways of just getting stuff into the yard, especially within pre-existing really strong archetypes. And so only really needing to hit a creature, which is often just the thing that you want to exile anyways. You want to keep your spells for your Snapcaster Mage, is fine and dandy. It also just, if it ends up in the graveyard, you can cash it in to draw a card for admittedly a chunk of mana, but at instant speed and not as a spell.
That's an interesting question for you. With its ability to draw a card from the graveyard, is there a way to win with this with like Lab Maniac, or is it just way too expensive?
It's probably too expensive, but it's a nice consideration. It's a nice consideration for sure. Anything you can do like that from the graveyard is worth looking at.
I guess Think Twice is just cheaper and isn't attached to a zombie horse.
Yeah.
You don't feel bad when you cast it, right?
Yeah. Up next, we have Dream Shackle Geist. 1 blue for a 3/1 spirit with flying. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you choose up to 1. Tap target creature, or target creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. I kind of love this card. I mean, that's most of the blue ghosts or geists in this set. It's just, I can't wait to lock down someone's Birds of Paradise with this card. That's all I'm going to say.
Right?
I'm going to be playing a lot of Mock Sapphire, I think, in the near future.
It is weird to see this power toughness and this casting cost and not also see the word flash, but I think that would be way too strong.
Yeah, that sounds like an Eldraine card to me.
No, this is going to do fantastic basically in any blue deck with flyers, right?
Yeah, I think more mid-rangey than, a control kind of deck. Again, like you said, not having flash is a bit of a deal breaker on that end. But aside from that, like, I'll play it with Mana Dorks, I'll play it without Mana Dorks. I think this one's pretty good. Pretty good.
Speaking of Geist, we have the Geist Light Snare, which is a 3-mana instant for 2 and a blue, and says this spell costs 1 less to cast if you control a spirit. It also costs 1 less to cast if you control an enchantment. And then it says counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. So this card is trying really hard to be a better mana leak. And I think it's pretty reasonable to call this mana leak number 2 in most decks. You're going to have yourself a Sylvan Library. You're going to have yourself probably a creature. But I think there are so many competitive counter spells. Oh god, this is what I'm really missing, Jer. There's so many competitive counter spells in this format that I don't think you end up playing this.
Oh, don't worry.
Well, hold on. I want to hear your thoughts after, but in my opinion, where counter spells are most impactful, especially these soft counter spells where they have to pay a certain amount of mana, are in the early game where you're not necessarily going to be able to have a board. And I don't think you're going to want to avoid playing a spell on turn 3 to hold this up.
Yeah, this isn't actually the counterspell that I want to have that talk on. That's coming up later. I've had a bit of an epiphany with counterspells lately.
Oh.
And boy, are my arms tired. But this one, I think it's just, it's so easy to paint a scenario where it's going to be 1 mana. And at 2 mana, it's also pretty good. I think that you have to be dedicated to playing spirits in some way, shape, or form, or have enough enchantments in your deck to want to play this. Like, you have to reliably hit 1, because at 3 mana, this card is just stone unplayable.
Yeah.
It's different from Mystical Dispute, where it's either 1 or 3.
Right.
But speaking of stone unplayable, that's not fair. That's not fair.
No. Run with that. Okay, got it. This card is bad. Sure.
Okay, draw Visionary Stitcher. It's 2 and a blue for a 1/4 human wizard, and it's a legend. Zombies you control have flying. You pay a blue tap, sack another non-token creature, create an XX blue zombie creature token where X is the sacrifice creature's toughness. See, it's not fair because I like zombies. I advocate for zombies. This is reasonable. Zombies is likely to be blue-black if you're or Esper, and so hey, wow, both those have blue, and so like giving your entire board flying is wild.
Yeah, that's actually shockingly powerful.
Yeah, it definitely suffers from the I'm a legend without an ETB, so Caracas is still going to muck this. But wow. Have you thought about this card with Field of the Dead, though, Serge?
I have not. Why are you excited about this card with Field of the Dead? Oh, because you make a million zombies and they all fly? I can't. Yeah. What's more
Yeah.
terrifying than 10 zombie tokens? 10 flying zombie tokens? All right. I mean, that's cool. Sorry. I was like, I don't see.
No, that's fine. I
Yeah. All right. I
also,
mean, that's kind of cool.
yeah,
All right. So draw not all that bad.
I think it's all right. I think he's all right.
You know, that segue though was still an inspired idea. Inspired idea is a 3 mana sorcery for 2 and a blue. But it also has cleave. So its cleave cost is 5 mana, 3 blue blue. Draw 3 cards. But for the cleave cost, your maximum hand size is reduced by 3 for the rest of the game. So for 3 mana, 3 cards, your hand is 3 for the rest of the game. For 5 mana, draw 3 cards.
It's reduced by 3. So your maximum would be 4.
Oh, that's not confusing at all.
Hey, and it's on a cleave card. They got to get their 2-for-1s while they can, right?
I guess so. I don't like this card.
Yeah.
I just don't like this card unless, and maybe go with me on this journey, because I bet you people are going to be like, but what if you're a reanimator deck and you want to be able to discard cards by reducing your maximum hand size? I think for 3 mana, you're probably better off just playing Frantic Search.
Yeah. Like Reanimator doesn't struggle with getting the creatures into the graveyard. It struggles with its so-called combo being, disruptible in 8 different ways at the same time.
Yeah, especially with all these new easy exile creatures they've printed.
I think if you are looking for a place to play this, you're wanting to play it alongside like a Baral or a Sapphire Medallion,
Sure.
like a High Tide or like a Heartbeat of Spring combo deck.
At that point, you don't even care about the mana, right? You're just like, I'll just draw. Yeah.
Yeah, but even then, like those decks aren't looking for more draw spells. They're looking for, well, ways to do things.
I was going to say win spells. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of win spells, here's Jacob Hauken Inspector. 1 in a blue. It's a 0/2 legendary human advisor that has tap, draw a card, and then exile a card from your hand face down. You can look at that card as long as it remains exiled, and you can pay 4 blue blue. If you do, transform Jacob Hauken. So this is all one single ability, and it transforms into a legendary enchantment called Hauken's Insight. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library face down. You can look at it as long as it remains exiled. Once during each of your turns, you may play a land or cast a spell from among the cards exiled with this permanent without paying its mana cost. I think I would rather just have a Jace Vryn's Prodigy.
I was about to say that, or what's the blue enchantment?
Monastery Siege?
No.
Search for Azcanta?
Search for Azcanta. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, I think there are just better options than this guy, but it's that ability, like the flip side. I mean, you like a good enchantment. Can you see yourself flipping this?
I can't, because you can't even let's imagine it's late game. Jacob still has summoning sickness.
Yeah.
Right? You have to wait an entire turn cycle in order to get to the other side, which is really risky when you're in a high-powered format like we play in, where Jacob could just die or get Krakus bounced, right?
Yeah. I just, God, I have ideas for this man, like a mono blue Time Warps Tolarian Academy style deck.
Sure.
But I don't think he's doing enough there.
Yeah.
Don't think he's doing enough.
What is doing enough
for not? Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Is Lantern Bearer. Actually, this card's probably fine because it's a 1 mana 1/1 flyer, and it disturbs for 3. So for 2 and a blue, you get the Lantern's Lift. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has flying. I mean, you gotta be loving this for your flying friends deck, right?
Serge, I got some bad news, dude. I spent like 3 hours building Flying Men decks a couple weeks ago.
And like the Lantern Bearer?
Well, first off, it wasn't out, but but secondly, there are so many Flying Men with upsides now, like 1 mana ones, that wow, that deck's actually good. Like before it was okay, but also not great. But this card just doesn't do enough for that. Like the slots are already so competitive now, which is a wild thing to say back when you were just aiming for scraps. But then also in a deck that's called Flying Men because everything has flying, the flip side, while it's nice to at least get something, the flip side giving something flying isn't really that big of a sell,
It's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. Yeah, so unfortunately, not for me, but this one is for meow, if you ask me. Mischievous Catgeist. 1 and a blue for a 1/1 cat spirit. Whenever Mischievous Catgeist deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Full stop. And then it has Disturb. So from the graveyard for 2 and a blue, it becomes Cat-like Curiosity, which is an aura enchanting a creature. Enchanted creature has whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, and then the obligatory Disturb, exile this if it goes to the graveyard from anywhere. I keep telling myself I'm not going to get fooled by the newest Ophidian that's released, but
Yeah.
they've been so nice with the werewolf that came out in the last set that was actually quite good. I think I like this one, and I think it's fine. I think it's fine.
Do
Like,
you? It's a 2-mana 1/1 with no evasion.
I know, and that's bad. We get punished for it all the time. But this card like perfectly summarizes that, right? Where you look at these kind of cards and you always think like, oh, it's so good. I'm going to get rid of all their blockers and I draw so many cards. And that does happen sometimes. And sometimes that all falls to crap. And when it falls to crap, you could then just have this aura that you then slap on a Vendilion Clique or slap on a Brazen Borrower and go to town. So I think it does enough. And I think the repeat value is enough that I want to give it a shot. And yeah, it's a cat. That might be contributing.
Sounds an awful lot like an overcharged amount. All right, that segue sucked.
Okay. I liked where it was going.
Yeah, overcharged amalgam is a 4-mana 3/3 zombie horror for 2 and a blue. Has flash, has flying, and has exploit. So exploit says when this creature enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a creature. And then when it exploits a creature, counter target spell, activated ability, or triggered ability. And it is worth mentioning that it can exploit itself. So worst case scenario, if you really wanted to, you could just cast this as a 4-mana counter or stifle, which is really quite good. Honestly, this card seems very strong, either as just a 4-mana flash threat with, 3 power and 3 toughness to, kill your opponent and not have to worry about 1/1 flying spirits jumping and killing it like it would your clique and stuff like that, or just as a way to have it enter the battlefield and counter something.
Yeah, I thought that this card was very good. And now I'm of the stance that this card is extremely good and likely I'm honestly willing to call this card a staple. I think that this card will become a staple. And mostly because, well, we just got Solitude, we got Grief, we got Endurance, all the incarnations from MH2. You can just go to use this ability. Like you play out that spell, and then with their evoke on the stack, you can exploit it to the overcharged amalgam. So their sacrifice is not in vain. You get to, cash them in. That sounds a little like aggressive, but you are likely going to take the opportunity of your opponent doing something like casting a spell in order to, you're tapped down on mana. I'm going to evoke this Solitude to kill your biggest thing. And then I'm also going to play this overcharged amalgam and sack it
To counter that spell.
Yeah. So now you have no spell and no board. How do you feel?
I feel awfully dead here. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And you can ephemerate this card and get it all over again. Or if you really want to, and you have other dorks lying around, you could exploit one of those, tokens that's just kicking it, a soldier token from an Elspeth or whatever, to counter the evoke sacrifice trigger to keep your 3/2 lifelinker around, or to keep your 3/2 menace or whatever. Yeah. Wow.
This card is very good.
Yeah, it's not bad. And speaking of not bad, in that I will be one of the few defenders of this, I feel, but Repository Scob, 3 and a blue for a 3/3 zombie, also has exploit. When Repository Scob exploits a creature, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. We have Eternal Witness and we have Timeless Witness, but this also just feeds into Spellseeker loops that can be very, very, very relevant in taking advantage of reanimation spells as well, or causing things to change zones. How do you feel about? Do you have any affinity towards the Spellseeker decks, like taking the infinite turn decks at all?
Not particularly. I can see the value in this. I also like that it's only a single blue as opposed to
Yeah.
the green that you need. So getting this effect in another color seems kind of nutty.
Yeah. Archaeomancer's too blue for that. But like the big thing is that this is a creature, but it also just immediately goes to the yard. And so that can get out of hand. Or it immediately makes something else go to the yard when Savine's Reclamation, or you, well, just, I guess, reanimate or unearth or whatever it may be.
Yeah, my brain doesn't approach magic the same way yours does. So I look at this and I kind of go shrug emoji, but I trust that when the Wheeler brain juices get flowing, there might be some potential there.
That's very flattering, but honestly, most of this is, oh, it'd be sick. And then whatever.
All right. Let's talk about the only commander card that we have chosen to include so far. And from the outlook, we don't actually think many of the commander cards are going to make a splash in this particular walk. And that's fine. Honestly, that's probably good.
Yep.
So we have decided to talk about Spectral Arcanist. This is a 4-mana 3/2 for 3 and a blue. It is a spirit wizard with flying. And when it enters the battlefield, you may cast an instant or sorcery with mana value less than or equal to the number of spirits you control from a graveyard, not even your own graveyard, from a graveyard without paying its mana cost. That spell would be put into the graveyard, exile it instead. Now, a beautiful thing about this that doesn't require a density of spirits, why you could play it alone, is crop rotation is in our format. Recall is in our format. It's just like the quality of 1 mana spells that exists in this means that even in the worst case scenario, that seems kind of cool and kind of spicy.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning that none of these target as well. Like, this is a recurring thing with a lot of cards that can disrupt the graveyard or have to choose something from the graveyard, is that there isn't that feel bad of, oh, your scavenging ooze ate my thing. Oops. And so,
It's just like when it resolves, you get to choose Ufa and or Doofa.
yeah, and again, hitting their thing too. Like, yeah, I'll just snag your Thoughtseize or your Lightning Bolt or whatever it may be. And that's just by itself, right? If you play this in a dedicated deck with other spirits, you can start casting some pretty nasty spells. If you're playing spirits, you are probably playing any number of the like ephemerate variants or essence fluxes that would bounce it too. So, which coincidentally, this could cast by itself right away. Yeah, this card is. I think it has its home, but where that home is, it's like Norm from Cheers. They just screaming out its name, and they're so excited. And well, Norm doesn't win you the game, but you get what I'm saying, right? Right? No? Okay. Well, here's something that's a bit more straightforward. Um, Storm Storm Chaser Drake. 1 in a blue for a 2/1 flying Drake. Whenever Storm Chaser Drake becomes the target of a spell you control, draw a card.
It's no wizard, but it sure looks like it wants to be a muscle wizard, Wheeler.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a wizard in that this feels like it's magic. Like, in not the game, but in the like, am I dreaming? Is this real? Like, wow, that's a hell of an ability to put on a magic card, Serge.
Yeah.
I would have played this if it was just a 2-mana 2/1 with flying. And now you have this added ability for every giant growth. Every time you play a spell to protect it as well, anytime you unsummon it to save it from a removal spell, you get to draw a card so that you don't feel bad about wasting that unsummon. Targeting a spell also means that, of course, auras will trigger. You get to,
Give it that curiosity.
yeah, exactly. There you go. So this is a card that breaks through, gets into Flying Men. This is why the quality it's not quite Lantern Bearer territory of what we're looking for, but we will go for Storm Chaser Drake. Yeah, this card is, wow.
I'm pretty thirsty to discover other cards that you like in this set.
I gotta tell you, I was expecting you to talk about, yeah, I can't wait to try this in Blue White Tempo where I God's willing it. But you know what? That segue, that'll do. That'll do.
So Thirst for Discovery is a 3-mana instant for 2 and a blue. Draw 3 cards, then discard 2 cards unless you discard a basic land card. Now, this is the third now in the
Hmm.
Thirst series. The original being discard an artifact, the second being discard an enchantment. This one saying discard a basic land. And that part is a little bit more difficult for us. I don't know many decks that are monocolored that want this sort of effect. And discarding two is not good. You never want to draw three pitch two, right?
Yeah, we've kind of moved on from these 3 mana draw spells. I'm now in this camp where I think that the cantrips in the format, the way you draw cards in this format, they have to be 1 mana or 2 mana, and everybody gets 1 4 drop, maybe 2 4 drops, but that's it. That's we're done. Like
Look, we don't make the rules, but
look, I'm sorry. That's just the reality of it. And that's okay. That's good. You'll still have cards in hand. Have you read Planeswalkers? Wowie zowie. Like, but yeah, I think you're right. There aren't enough like monocolored or maybe 2 color archetypes that would want something like this and can justify it, even if it is like an instant speed compulsive research. Maybe Omnitel, maybe a mono blue or a blue black omniscient style deck.
yeah, but there's better draw spells. Like at that point, you're not playing a 3 mana draw spell. You're playing all like the 5 mana draw spells that make you draw everything, right? Like it's not big enough to be worth that ceiling either.
Just going to cleanly move into Wash Away. 1 blue, it's an instant. It has Cleave for 1 blue. So the 1 blue mode is counter target spell that wasn't cast from its owner's hand. And then the Cleave cost is counter target spell. This is the 3 mana counter that I was going to give my piece on, where I think, much like the cantrips, play as many free counters, 1 mana, and 2 mana counters as you'd like, but you only get 1 3 mana counter spell, maybe 2 if you are a really grindy control deck or Chris Sutherland. Those are the 2 qualifiers. And I think for cards like this, this is, if you're looking to double up on that, this is what you would want to double up with. This is in that mystical dispute kind of line where you look at this and you're like, okay, if I pay 3, it's just done. It's good. But if I'm mucking someone's Snapcaster Mage, their Ancestral Vision, the rebound on Ephemerate, a Yawgmoth's Will, like where it counts, the 1 mana part of this is phenomenal.
Mm.
And you can find it off Spellseeker.
Oh yeah, you can get a solid counter off that too. No, I like Wash Away. I think this is strong.
Yeah, I think it's came at a great time as far as the format's considered, like the speed and the kind of card choices you make, but it's also just really strong.
And the final card we're going to talk about today is Witness the Future. This is a 3 mana sorcery for 2 and a blue. Target player shuffles up to 4 target cards from their graveyard into their library. You look at the top 4 cards of your library and then put one of those cards into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. I just had to reread it to make sure I understand this. So you can target one graveyard and it's up to 4 cards in either player's graveyard. And then regardless of whose graveyard you target, you still get to look at the top 4 cards of your library and put one into your hand in a random order.
Yeah. You get to either shuffle the good stuff you like or put the stuff that they're trying to reanimate back into their deck. And then either way, you get to impulse.
I don't know if I like this. I don't know if this does enough.
So there's a very key line of text that's missing from this card that every other kind of card like this usually has.
And what's that?
Well, it doesn't exile itself.
You got something degenerate in mind with this?
Yeah, I think you have to be degenerate if you're playing this card.
Yeah,
I think
this is slow. This is slow, and sure, there are like weird edge cases where like I could hit my opponent's reanimator thing, or I could mess up my goblin opponent's recruiter stack or something. But
right, no, my intention with this card is to shuffle my High Tide back into my deck, and then look for my High Tide or look for my Frantic Search, my Untapper, and I think this is kind of in that same. This is just a better version of Inspired Idea.
All right, tell me about Inspired Idea.
But that was the 3 mana draw 3, but then your maximum hand side is reduced by 3.
Yeah.
In that, they fill similar-ish roles, similar-ish decks, but ultimately this one is going to better set up you for degeneracy, and the impulse effects are typically better than raw card draw if you're comboing, and especially when you're starting to go off.
You're trying to do with this the old High Tide player line of I don't quite have lethal as the High Tide deck, but I'm getting pretty close. So I'm going to Blue Sun Zenith myself for like 30 cards and then hopefully redraw Blue Sun Zenith and enough action to actually win.
Yeah, I'm gonna time twister with the idea that now the card is in my deck and tutorable, or that it is now in a zone where if I'm not able to go off, then it is at least much safer. And I think that's pretty strong. I think this card is niche in its application, but it does something we haven't seen before, and it also just has a line of text missing.
Cool. No, I mean, that's powerful and definitely worth investigating.
Mm-hmm.
All right, everybody, that is going to do it for part 1 of our set review today. And I'm very curious, what did you think? What did you think about just Wheeler and I and an increase in banter? And also me stepping up and actually evaluating cards instead of playing the host role. This is a change in the format of the show, a change in the format, almost 3 years in the making here. And we hope you like it. I'm nervous. Wheeler didn't straight out say I was wrong on any card, so I still
You
got
did
it.
great, bud. You did great. Not a single Renin 6 in sight.
God, no. Oh, my Achilles heel of Planeswalker evaluation. So it goes. As always, if there are cards that we didn't talk about that you think are interesting, let us know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. Reminder, this podcast is brought to you by you through support over the Patreon at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. I've been Serge, joined by the wonderful Wheeler, and we will see you next time.